Good morning, everyone.
I did.
It's quite loud. Thank you all so much for being here. As Dan mentioned, my name is Heather McPherson. I'm the Executive Director of the Alberta Council for Global Cooperation. Thank you to everyone who has joined us from all across the country. I do apologize. We really did turn that thermostat down on you, so my apologies for that. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to the second annual Together Symposium on Collaboration, Innovation, and the Sustainable Development Goals. This is a wonderful opportunity for us to talk about sustainable development, and I'm very, very excited about the 2 days ahead of us. Before we start, I think it's very, very important that we officially acknowledge the land that we gather on, that we are on Treaty 6 territory. This is a traditional meeting ground for many Indigenous people. The territory on which we gather provided a traveling route and a home to the Cree, Blackfoot, and Métis people, as it did for the Nakota, the Tsuut'ina, the Chippewan, and other Indigenous peoples. It's very fitting for us to talk about, acknowledge the land we're on while we talk about sustainable development. The concepts of universality, what was done in our country, and the work that we have moving forward to reconcile our history with our First Nation peoples. I'm going to invite Elder Megan Moran out onto the stage, and she is going to start the session for us. Megan? And we have a mic for you at the front.
Good morning, everyone. Well, first of all, my name is Megan Moran. I'm one of the cultural connectors with Bent Arrow. I've been there for 2 years, and it is my honor to be here today. So I'll start off with a little prayer this morning. First of all, Creator, I'd like to give thanks for this day today. I give thanks for our water, earth, wind, and fire. I give thanks to the 4 directions. I give thanks to the 2-legged, the 4-legged, the flying, the water, the crawling creatures, everything Creator has created. I give thanks for Mother Earth. Creator, I ask for special blessings for each and every one of us sitting in and standing in this room. And for those that couldn't be here today, that we acknowledge them as well. I ask for special blessings for each and every one of your home fires, for your families, and also to give thanks for the new season to welcome Old Man Winter. Creator, if I've forgotten anyone or anything, please forgive me. Aye. So the song that I'm going to be singing, it is been composed by one of my mentors, and his name is Leo McGilvery. And he has, Bent Arrow has offered the proper protocol to be able to sing this song and share the gift of song and dance with all our relations. So in this song, it's the word Asomemenan means blessings. Nimama is the Mother Earth, so it's asking for blessings for all creations that walk this earth. So it is my honor and privilege to sing to each and every one of you.
That was wonderful. What a wonderful way to start the symposium. I'd like to actually now ask Linda Duncan to join me up on the stage. Linda Duncan is the Member of Parliament for the location that we're in today for the University of Alberta. She was elected in 2008, and she is actually the current NDP critic for international development. I know Linda has just got back from some recent trips abroad. She's also been the critic for climate and environment and climate change, and is the deputy critic at the moment. She's previously served as critic for transport, for Aboriginal affairs and northern development, for public works and government services, and for Western economic diversification. In every role that Linda has played as our MP in Edmonton Strathcona, she's taking the voice of Albertans to Ottawa and has done an amazing job over the last decade. We'd like to welcome Linda on stage to share some remarks and open the event for us.
Thank you very much, Heather, and thank you to the facilitator. I always do the same thing, move up. It's nice to see the faces of everybody rather than on the dark corners. So I too wish to recognize that we are in Treaty 6 territory and long-standing territory of the Métis of Alberta. So, welcome to Edmonton Strathcona, best riding in all of Canada. And yeah, applause. And of course, as Heather mentioned, it's my privilege to represent this university, as well as the Alberta Council for Global Cooperation and many of its member organizations. That's a real privilege. And I'll always welcome their voices and bringing those voices to the House of Commons. So congratulations, ACGC, for the second important conference. These are the most important dialogues of the century. This is the most important measure, this 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda is the most important agenda to ensure the future, particularly of the young people in our crowd today. And so I look forward to the deliberations of everybody today, and I want to actively participate. And I will remind you that as an opposition member, it's my duty to hold the federal government accountable. And I'm looking forward to your voices and your ideas on how I can do that in a very constructive way. So I'll value your insights from today and the insights not just in the 2030 agenda, but also on our many commitments made internationally on climate change and biodiversity and on Indigenous and civil rights. So as many are pointing out, including the OECD, all of these fit together, and it's our challenge over the next 2 days to be coming up with better recommendations on how all of our governments can tie these together and actually deliver a better future. I gained a lot of appreciation for the actions needed at this past summer at the UN Conference on Sustainable Development in New York. And it was particularly helpful to listen to civil society and the strategies of other nations. And I discovered that many nations consider the required national voluntary reports should come from the people, not the governments. So I would encourage that folk today think about that too, is that these reports on how well we are doing on delivering on these 17 targets is our responsibility and the duty of the government to consider what we're saying and how well we are moving forward. We definitely heard at that conference on calls for deeper engagement of civil society in both the development of the strategies on all 17 of those goals and the individual indicators, but also in the stock taking. And last week in the House of Commons, I tabled a motion to institute a strengthened process for the engagement and accountability on climate change, modeled on the United Kingdom, on Germany, on Finland, and several other countries. It's absolutely critical in moving forward if we can try to meet these goals by 2030. That's 10 years from now. We need the engagement of civil society, of all these brilliant minds here today, and the communities that you represent. I've also worked very closely with my colleague Romeo Saganash on trying to get the government to actually incorporate into Canadian law the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People, as we have committed internationally. I've noted that the reports not only by Canada's Commissioner for Environment and Sustainable Development, but also the joint audits. And I don't know if all of you here are aware of that, but all the auditors of the world have come together to come up with a mechanism to actually hold the governments accountable to actually delivering on these goals. And our incredible Commissioner for Environment and Sustainable Development, and we've had a series of those. Right now we have a wonderful one in Julie Gelfin. She has issued scathing audits of the federal government, including as recently as this past spring. And her report is that the federal government has failed in federal action to deliver on its commitments, not only for sustainable development goals, but for climate and biodiversity. And here's what she found. No whole-of-government approach, lack of communications and engagement strategy, incomplete national targets, no system to measure, monitor, and report on progress, that Canada is unlikely to meet the 2020 biodiversity goals, and an absolute failure to engage Indigenous peoples or to respond to civil society calls for action. And I need only mention the series of calls for action to protect the last remaining caribou in this province. We've heard the calls for the protection of the orca and other marine mammals because of developments by this province. And this province relies on the federal government to do their job. Well, the federal government's failed in their job, and therefore they're having to renew the review, which, impacts the economy. So we need to be speaking out, and we need to have representatives in government that hear your calls for action. We shouldn't have to go to court to do that. But repeatedly, actions in court have forced the government to act. There was a very famous case against the former Minister of Environment, Jim Prentice, under the Conservatives, and that court held that the minister had failed to consider the rights and interests and treaty rights of Indigenous people in making the determinations on how they would save the caribou habitat. So civil society does have these rights. Indigenous people do have those rights. It's my job as an opposition member to hold the government accountable, but it's also your right and opportunity and to be speaking out, and it's my job to make sure that I listen to your calls. In sum, the Goals Shadow Report on Canada said, in quotes, contrary to the guiding principles of the 2030 Agenda, that no one should be left behind, a favorite term of mine, that was Jack Layton's, Indigenous peoples, women, girls, youth, and nature are being left behind. And isn't that the whole point of the 2030 Agenda? So we have work to do. It's possible. But it's our job also to give advice to the government on how we can do that constructively and effectively and as rapidly as possible. The OECD has also slapped Canada's wrists on the low-level investment in international assistance, among the lowest in history. Now, Heather mentioned that I just came back from an incredible mission to West Africa, where I traveled with the Governor General and a number of experts in maternal health, in engineering, in the arts. And we had a discussion about that. Should the issue really be the amount of aid, or it should be how we're targeting that aid? My feeling is it should be both, and I am very grateful for civil society for keeping up the heat and getting me to raise that issue before the government, that Canada absolutely must do its part. We must do its part to assist the developing world to meet these goals, but we must also set an example for the developing world by delivering on these goals ourselves. I am thoroughly relieved, as I'm sure any of you here in a civil society organization, that the current government has restored the programs supportive of projects by civil society. It's my experience, both working in Canada and working overseas, that that is one of the best models for delivering assistance overseas, is civil society to civil society, because that is where the trust is built. And so I look forward to your input on that as well, of how we can build the funds to ensure that your important organizations can continue your work and build that in building partnerships overseas. I have to admit, I have some concern about the push for greater private sector investment in international development. There's a lot of what they say is dead money that is just sitting there that could be invested, and a lot of that money could be invested on building infrastructure and opportunities overseas. But we have to watchdog and make sure that the investment of Canadian dollars is assisting those most in need. One of those goals is to reduce poverty. So yes, let's bring on private sector investment, but we shouldn't take the heat off our own government for doing their part. We have also, in my party, commended the Feminist International Assistance Policy, but I would point out again that the OECD report says more work is needed in Canada to address gender inequality, environmental sustainability, and governance, and that those must be addressed in tandem. And that tends to be what I heard coming out of New York, is that you can't just hand-pick. You know, it's good that countries are saying, okay, we're going to put our aid money in this direction, and everybody recognizes that it's women and girls that are suffering the most, don't have the rights to have a say in governance, or in living in the worst poverty and conditions. But we have to make sure that any assistance that we're giving on environmental sustainability and the right to govern is tied to that gender policy. So, as I say, I just returned from an amazing mission to West Africa. And I was in East Africa a couple of years ago with a government mission, and I heard the same question, and that is, what happened to CETA? So I think there's a big job to be done by our federal government to internalize and make clear, both in Canada and outside, that we're still committed to giving international assistance. Who do you contact? Where is it coming from? Is it still tied to trade benefits to Canada? So I found it very interesting that a good number of people raised that with me. So we witnessed a lot of signs of progress. I have to say that I was incredibly inspired by civil society organizations that I met in Burkina Faso, in Cote d'Ivoire, and in Nigeria. Incredible confidence in civil society organizations in Nigeria particularly. You know, they're working on anti-corruption, they're working on greater transparency, they're working on recycling, they're working on deploying renewable energy. I met a chief of one of the tribes who's also an engineer. She's looking for assistance to deploy solar energy to the farm women. So they're interested, they're keen, and I think the importance is that we target our aid properly. My final comment is this. One of the most amazing people that I met at the UN was Margot Goodhand. Margot is an Indigenous health specialist, teaches in British Columbia. And I met with her last week in Ottawa, and she has a campaign that I would encourage you to buy into. And her campaign is the addition of the 18th goal, and the 18th goal is self-determination. So when I look at that array, I'm not finding that there. And gosh, there's a little slot right there where that could fit in. So thank you very much. I look forward to hearing the wisdom of everybody here in the conference. And thank you, Heather.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thanks, Linda. That's great. Those are great comments and an excellent way to get us started on our thinking. I'm now going to ask Dr. Huang from the University of Alberta to join me on the stage. Dr. Huang has taken on the interim vice provost. We're making it tricky on you there. Sorry about that. Has taken on the interim vice provost and associate vice president international role since July 2018, prior to being appointed as the executive director of international partnerships and associate vice president international advancement in January 2018. Dr. Huang was the Executive Director of International Relations and Recruitment and the Assistant Vice President with the University of Alberta International from February 2009 until December 2017. She's also an adjunct professor in the Faculty of Education at the University of Alberta, where she started in 2009. If you would like to join me up on the stage. Thanks very much. Nice to see you.
I also would like to first acknowledge the University of Alberta respectfully acknowledges that we are located on the Treaty 6 territory, traditional lands of First Nations and Métis people. So on behalf of the University of Alberta, I'm very delighted to welcome you all here today for what will no doubt be an exciting and important two-day event. I do like to welcome our special guest. You're coming to the conference and also to University of Alberta campus. So Linda, you already gave excellent remarks, and also Heather. I want to acknowledge you. And also I would like to acknowledge Cesar Shahid. don't know if she's here yet. She's a co-founder of NOW Now Ventures and Malala Fund, and she will be a keynote speaker in our event. And Stephanie Vollen, manager of the Government of Alberta's Sustainable Development Goals Unit, Stephanie, and Megan Wilkinson, Director, International Assistance Policy Coordination at Global Affairs Canada, and Wang Lanzi, Director, Partnership for Development Innovation, Global Affairs Canada. And of course, I would also like to welcome the sponsors and partners of the Together 2018, and all of you for coming today and expressing your interest in contributing to the discussion on the implementation of the UN Sustainable Development Goals in Canada and abroad. The Sustainable Development Goals topic is extremely important, and the University of Alberta is aiming to take a fundamental part in moving our province and country to helping, right, forward in addressing all 17 SDGs. No doubt that the best solution can be found only through dialogue and mutual learning between all interested parties. And that's why the 2018 Together Conference is a great platform to discuss all angles and perspectives of addressing the Sustainable Development Goals in Alberta and global scales. At the moment, it is not an exaggeration to say that almost all faculties at the University of Alberta are engaged in collaboration and research innovation that deals with Sustainable Development Goals in different degrees and from various perspectives. For the public good, that's our academic plan. Our university community committed to identify a portfolio of signature research areas where we are or will be recognized as a global leader. The first 3 signature areas were announced in late September. And they are precision health, energy systems, and the research in the intersections of gender. All these signature areas are correlated with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. For example, precision health correlates with Sustainable Development Goals number 3, good health and well-being. Energy systems correlates with Sustainable Development Goal number 7, good, affordable and clean energy. And research in the intersections of gender correlates with Sustainable Development Goals number 5, gender equality. It is a great honor for our university to be the host sponsor to the Together 2018 conference. And we believe that today's event will stipulate not only further exchanges of information and mutual learning and understanding in regards to collaboration, innovation, and the Sustainable Development Goals, but also boost academic, business, community, and the research partnership development. So I wish the conference great success. Thank you once again for coming on campus. And we are glad to see you all today. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Thank you. All right, so now we get to work a little bit. So over the next 2 days, you're going to have an opportunity to hear from some of the best thought leaders on the Sustainable Development Goals in the country. We're delighted that you're going to have this opportunity, and I want to encourage you to make time to talk to those people that you don't know in the room. Talk to those people that are not the ones that you always sit next to or talk to at conferences. this is a great opportunity to have this dialogue. This is one of the important parts about the Together Symposium for me is the opportunity for private sector, for civil society, for academics, for individuals, for youth, for Indigenous people, for everybody to come together and have a conversation about the Sustainable Development Goals. This is what's so important about this symposium. We also have some really strong speakers that I'm delighted that we were able to bring in. So Shiza Shahid from, as was mentioned, from the Malala Fund and from Now Ventures is going to be joining us today. We'll be hearing from her at about 11 o'clock, I believe. And then Paul Pullman, the CEO from Unilever, will be joining us virtually tomorrow. So he will be the keynote at the beginning of the day tomorrow as well. Before we get started, I'd like to make a point of thanking our sponsors and our partners from the bottom of my heart. We couldn't do this without them. So I would like to take some time to acknowledge the Government of Canada and Global Affairs Canada, both for their support financially and also for participating in the program and joining us today. I'd like to thank the University of Alberta International, who is our co-host in this event, and for letting us have this event on campus. Nutrien is one of our sponsors, and we're very, very delighted to have them join us for the second year. Suncor is joining us as one of our sponsors. MJ Wilson and Associates is here joining us. Change for Children Association, one of, I believe, Lorraine, 42-year-old organization that we have working on reducing poverty around the world. I'd also like to thank all of the members of the advisory committees. We'll talk about that a little bit later. This was a bit of a different makeup. We had advisory committees working on a whole bunch of different topics and putting in an awful lot of work. And I would actually like to just take one moment. I'm sure they may not be here, the ACGC staff, I'd like to just acknowledge that this conference is predominantly put on by 4 people that work in the ACGC office, and they're remarkable. Particular kudos needs to go to Laveza Khan, who is just standing over there in the corner. I really can't imagine anyone got here without hearing from Laveza. I think what was the record? I think 150 emails one day. Yeah, there was lots going on. I'd also, of course, like to thank all our volunteers, and I would like to thank all the speakers that joined us today as well. We have a few very exciting things that will be happening as well over the next few days. The Waterloo Global Science Initiative, I always call them WGSI, so I have to look it up to remember, is going to be releasing their SDG blueprint, so that'll be happening this evening. And there will be wine and beer, if you're more of a beer person. And then yesterday, I want to just acknowledge as well that yesterday we had this fantastic day. So Jason Blackstock from the University College of London ran a sort of an innovation program called How to Change the World. And he had people that joined for the entire day working on wicked problems around the SDGs. And it was this super dynamic, very interesting sort of bringing together of different diverse perspectives and thinking about the problems that we need to solve around the SDGs. So that was fantastic. And then the last thing I just wanted to really quickly thank is the participants that aren't here. So last year, everybody came to Calgary for the first symposium. This year, we thought, what would be a more sustainable way to do that? And what we are doing now is we have satellite conferences happening across the country. So over the next 2 days, at various times during the program, we will have people joining us from Whitehorse, from Yellowknife, from Winnipeg, from Saskatchewan, from Saskatoon, from Toronto, from Charlottetown, and from Halifax. So we are so delighted that in this room, we're going to have great conversations, but the idea that the SDGs are going to be talked about across the country is wonderful and very, very exciting moment in time. So I'd like to just bring Dan back up on stage and have a wonderful, wonderful symposium.
All right, thank you very much. Two housekeeping things that we want to share with you before we get going. First of all, to build on the minimizing our footprint, we have the satellite conferences happening right across the country, as Heather was describing. All food is vegetarian, all sustainable packaging and serving materials. We've got no printed delegate packages. We have a keynote speaker tomorrow morning who's going to be joining us via satellite, no footprint there. And we've got fair trade coffee and tea. Now, in terms of safety issues, I was reminded that there are exits. I mean, I feel like we're on an Air Canada flight here. But do buckle your seatbelts. On each side of the room, social media. Let's put up the hashtag Together2018. You should know that. Secondly, in terms of Q's and A's during panels and other sessions that we'll have, we're going to be using Slido. So if you want to ask questions, you could navigate to Slido and enter the code hashtag, and we're getting there, hashtag Together2018. There we go. And we'll remind you just before we get into the Q's and A's. The schedule for today and tomorrow, of course, are available on your name tags. And in the rush of organizing, by the way, you might have Monday, November 5, which is today, and tomorrow you've got Monday, November 6. So we just thought it'd be a great long day over 2 days. So pardon the confusion there at one point. You'll also be able to log in on Sched to be able to see the schedule as the day emerges, the days emerge. Today, of course, we're holding our session in this Meyer Horowitz Theater and Atrium. We'll be having a break, and I'll remind you later, down the hall in the Dunwoody Lounge. Tomorrow morning we'll not be here, we'll be at the Lister Hall, and it's the Lister Conference Services. It's a short walk towards 87th Avenue. Don't show up here today because tomorrow, because you'll be seeing Mamma Mia instead of our conference. So that is it for that. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Martin Kerr. Martin rocked the socks of the people who were here, very few, early this morning. Building his career in the streets, one passerby at a time, Martin's been able to make a living as an independent musician for the past 10 years now. With the support of a local fan base, he's been able to achieve things that are usually out of reach for an independent musician, such as selling out 2 nights at the 1,700-seat Winspear Center and landing his latest album in the Canadian Top 10. Please put your hands together to welcome Martin Kerr. Martin, welcome.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here bright and early with you. I think it's 9:45 MST right now, but the real MST is musician standard time. It's actually 5:45 a.m. musician standard time right now. I wrote this song, which is called Everyone, and performed it at the Canadian Human Rights Convention in Ottawa last summer, 2017. And I don't think I've played it since. But I'm going to play it for you tonight. This morning, rather. So wish me luck. You know, there are times when we want to change the world, when we want to make a difference, that we have to step out of our comfort zone and do something that we're not quite ready for. So it's in that spirit that I offer you this song this morning, and it's called Everyone. Beyond these walls, there's a whole world that's spinning, and they say it's all about losing and winning, but I know that's a lie. This is only the beginning, and the future is in our hands. We're building a place where everyone can belong. We're woven together like the notes of a song. I'll open my mind, open my heart, find a way to play my part. I'm gonna open my mind, open my heart, find a way to play my part in building a place where everyone can belong. Au-delà des couleurs, au-delà des noms, nous ne sommes qu'un. Nous nous rassemblons, nous sommes l'humanité, pas les riches et les pauvres, et la terre n'est qu'un seul pays. Chacun trouve sa place dans ce monde que nous créons, tous en harmonie dans les notes comme chansons.
woven together like the notes of a song. I'll open up my mind, I'll open up my heart. I can find a way that I can play my part, building a place where everyone can belong. So we're building a place where everyone, building a place where everyone, building a place where everyone can belong.
Martin, we really appreciate your talent and sharing it with us today, and it's really fitting that it starts this symposium on that note. Thank you, and safe travels to Vancouver Island. We're going to be featuring in the course of the day what we call SDG Spotlights. This is really to showcase the good work that's going on right across this beautiful country and contributions to the achievement of the SDGs. We're going to be starting with Engineers Without Borders Canada, and to feature their good work, I'm going to be inviting Brett McMillan to come up to the stage and to deliver what Engineers Without Borders are actually doing. Please give him a warm welcome. Hey, man.
Thank you. Is there a clicker? Perfect. Okay, right on. So hi everybody. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here. Thank you to everybody who organized together. I'm really excited to be able to share the stage with the folks who are going to be speaking throughout the course of these 2 days. So we'll dig on into Engineers Without Borders Canada. Having been involved in our community for more than 5 years now, I've had a lot of people ask me the question, so you're just like Doctors Without Borders? And the answer to that is that no, we're not just like Doctors Without Borders. We do a lot of other complicated stuff that's really fun. The simple answer to what we do is we work to improve how international development is done. We do that by bringing people and ideas together to address the most crucial causes behind poverty and inequality. In reality, that's not very simple. So we have 3 main areas that we focus in. The first is our ventures and fellows. We invest financially and with people power in 9 different ventures overseas in sub-Saharan Africa. We have a number of awesome ventures that we work with that are focused on innovation, trying to change how business is run within the countries that we do the work in. Some of our ventures do really cool stuff. We have one that has an SMS-based text messaging service that's been used to share health awareness during Ebola breakouts. One that is basically Uber for tractors, helping farmers to improve their crop yields, and folks who have tractors and other farm equipment to reap better rewards for their services. So in keeping in mind Uber, we're very hip and with it, and that leads to our community. As you can see, our technology is always great, and this is a super pixely picture. But our community in Canada is made up of more than 1,600 members. We have professional chapters and university chapters from coast to coast, and they do a wide range of activities. They advocate for fair trade. They try to bring more socially inclusive policies to the universities that they operate in. And the University of Alberta chapter is here. They're in the orange scarves. I encourage you to ask them lots of questions outside. And one thing that they participate in is the third piece. It's our advocacy work. I was going to talk about some policies that we got put in place and that we implemented, but it was boring and I don't really want to talk about it. So I'm going to talk about our campaign, Hello 2030. It's exciting, it's engaging. Hello 2030 is all about challenging Canadians to think about the world that they want to see in 2030. It's asking them that question and having them shout it to the world and then take action towards it. It's really fitting that we're sharing this together. This is the first time that we are speaking outside of that community about this campaign. And we really see it as the need for more Canadians and more members of society to say the world that they want to see in Hello 2030 and the actions that they're going to take towards it. The world that I want to see in 2030 is one with engaged young leaders who are actively taking action to bridge gaps in inequality that exists in the world. The actions that I'm taking are speaking about Hello 2030 to excellent groups of people and continuing to invest in the communities and the young leaders who I know personally. We want as many people as possible to take the pledge for Hello 2030 and to start taking actions towards the Sustainable Development Goals. So, I'm going to ask everybody at some point today to go to hello2030.ca, take our pledge. You'll automatically get some emails with some suggestions on actions that you can take immediately, and you can share that with your friends and families. So I'm sure we all know lots of stuff about the SDGs, and we're all actively taking actions, but for your friends and family who you want to bring into it, Hello 2030 is a really great gateway for them to step into taking actions and understanding the SDGs. Thanks again, everybody. I'm going to hand it back to Dan.
All right. Good hand of applause for the good work. Thank you very much. We're going to now hear from Net Impact. Rudnick is, don't know where he's sitting, but he's going to join us up here to share the good work that's going on in Net Impact. Ashton, good hand of applause for Ashton. All right, is that microphone good? All right, very good.
Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for having us here today. My name is Ashton Rudanik, and I am the president of the Net Impact Edmonton Professional Chapter. Just a show of hands, how many of you have heard of Net Impact before? Oh, good, quite a few people, that's wonderful. So Net Impact is actually a not-for-profit that focuses on enabling the next generation of leaders to build a more just and sustainable world. So Net Impact has 400 chapters around the world. There's even chapters now in South America and West and East Africa. So these chapters are on university campuses. There's one here at the U of A, at the Alberta School of Business in the MBA program. There's some in cities, like the Net Impact Edmonton Professional Chapter, and also in companies like 3M. So Net Impact has a headquarters in Oakland, California, and how they support the local chapters is they provide programming and events, kind of like an event-in-a-box concept. And quite a few of those events are actually deeply rooted in the SDGs. So anything from a sustainable clothing challenge to one about addressing climate change through a case competition, they're really trying to mobilize these local chapters to address the SDGs in their own way. They actually had an annual conference, and I was just at it last week in Phoenix, and there's more than 1,000 change makers from around the world, and a big topic of conversation was the SDGs. So what about our Net Impact Edmonton Professional Chapter? Well, our vision is to make Edmonton a global sustainability leader. And our mission is to inspire, educate, and equip our community to build a more socially and environmentally sustainable Edmonton by harnessing the power of business. Anyone can join the Net Impact Edmonton Professional Chapter, and you don't have to have sustainability or CSR in your job title. We truly believe in leading from your seat. So no matter what your job is in your organization, or if you're a student or you're part of a community group, we believe that you can make a change, and we're here to inspire you to do that. Our last 3 events, our most recent events, have really focused on the SDGs. So we want to have our events really drive home a key message and have some learning objectives tied to them. So our first event of the season was a Sustainable Buildings walking tour, where we walked around downtown Edmonton, and an engineer led the event, and we got to learn about LEED and BOMA BEST certifications and how we can embed practical sustainability into building and restoring some of our greatest infrastructure and assets. Our second event was a sold-out, really amazing panel with some key community partners. So it was called Advancing Gender Diversity, Investor Perspectives. And we heard from AIMCO, NEI Investments, CIBC Goodwood Gundy, and Finning about how they're exercising voice to advance gender equality for all. So that relates to SDG 5, and the last one relates to SDG 11. And our next event, coming up at the end of November, is a tour of the Goodwill Impact Center. So as you know, Goodwill provides employment opportunities for people with disabilities, and they're also helping with sustainable consumption and production by recycling clothing and other household items. So we encourage you to join us for that, and again, ties to SDG 8 and 12. So how can you get in touch with Net Impact? You can visit our website. We're also on social media. You don't have to be a member to attend our events, but if you do become a member, you have the opportunity to have discounts on our events and exclusive member-only opportunities, and you can take part in our elections and even run for our executive team. We're always looking for people to partner on events with. We partner a lot with, as I mentioned in the last slide, with both the private sector and civil society. So I encourage you to get in touch with us. We would love to collaborate. I was already thinking about how I could collaborate with Engineers Without Borders, so I want to talk to you after this. So thank you very much again for the opportunity to be here today, and I encourage you to get involved with Net Impact. Now that you know more, you can do more. Thank you.
All right, thank you very, very much. And you'll see a little later on today, ladies and gentlemen, the great work that many, many Canadians across this country are taking on in the fulfillment of the SDGs. I'm going to, at this point, welcome and and invite you to join me in welcoming locations that are joining us at this time: Halifax, Charlottetown, and Toronto. Big warm welcome for those three cities joining us this morning. I will also ask our panelists to join me on stage. We're going to be focusing now on local to global. Come on up, Fraser, if you would. All the other panelists, if you can join me up on stage. And this is really about taking stock of Canada's progress on the SDGs at home and around the world. Now, quick question for you, and I'm looking for a show of hands. How many of you had joined the group in Calgary for Together 2017? Show of hands. All right. Well, you know what? Thank you for coming back. And we're going to be focusing now on what progress has been taking place over the past year. The types of things that we're really proud to see have moved. The needle has moved, and the progress has taken place. Let's figure out the extent to which it has. Let me introduce the panelists. First of all, I'm going to start with Stéphanie Vallon. Stéphanie Vallon is over here, and she is the Government of Canada representative. She's with the Employment and Social Development Canada. She's a passionate leader on engagement and communications for the SDGs, and they've just created a unit in that department that is coordinating and engaging the Government of Canada, will be coordinating the efforts of the Government of Canada in this matter. The new unit serves as a focal point for Canada's implementation of the 2030 Agenda, and will coordinate, track, report, and communicate Canada's progress towards the SDGs. Good hand of applause and welcome to Stéphanie Vallon. We've got next to Stéphanie, Fraser Riley-King. Fraser, you're with the Canadian Council for International Cooperation, and there you are the Research and Policy Manager at CCIC. And CCIC, for those of you who might not know, is the umbrella organization for Canadian not-for-profit organizations engaged in international development work. Please welcome Fraser. We also have John Beale. John, we've skipped over one for a second. John is the Sustainable Development Solutions Network representative, SDSN of Canada. John is the manager of the Sustainable Development Solutions Network that's hosted by the University of Waterloo. SDSN, for those of Canada, for those of you who don't know, is part of the global SDSN movement to build a network of universities, colleges, research centers, and knowledge institutions to promote practical solutions for sustainable development. With over 800 participating institutions worldwide. SDSN members work together to support action-oriented research to address some of the world's most pressing problems, including the implementation of the SDGs and the Paris Climate Agreement. Please welcome John Beal. Now, the gentleman at the center? Mel. Mel Wilson. Mel Wilson.
Did we lose you?
I lost Mel Wilson in a version. But Mel, here you are. You're the active sustainability consultant in Calgary for over 25 years, specializing in environmental sustainability reporting and assurance. Please welcome Mel Wilson. Stéphanie, on commence avec toi. We're starting with you. Please share with us the types of things that you're up to and the type of progress that's taken place from your perspective over the past 12 months.
Okay. So thank you for inviting me to be part of this panel to discuss Canada's progress and challenges to date in implementing the 2030 Agenda. And I'm going to focus really a little bit, I'm going to talk about what we've done in terms of Government of Canada progress, but a little bit about the future. And specifically the work of the Government of Canada's new Sustainable Development Goals Unit, or we like to call ourselves the SDG Unit, which was just recently established this September, and really the work that lies ahead of us. And from my perspective, what comes next is at once really super exciting, but also really daunting and challenging. As you may know, Canada signed on to the 2030 Agenda in 2015. And since that time, many organizations across Canada and abroad have been doing really great work. At the federal level, we've been moving forward with priorities, policies, and initiatives that align really well with the 2030 Agenda. Priorities like eliminating poverty, reconciliation with Indigenous peoples, promoting gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls, taking action on climate change, and protecting the oceans are all making an impact on the SDGs. Canada is also a strong advocate, both domestically and internationally, for the equality, empowerment, and inclusion of marginalized and underrepresented groups, including women, Indigenous peoples, newcomers to Canada, persons with disabilities, and members of the LGBTQ2 community. And these are some of the things that Canada brought forward during the Voluntary National Review at the High-Level Political Forum at the UN in New York this past July. And for Canada, the review is really a snapshot of where we are now, and it highlighted where progress is being made, but also where more action is needed. And what really came to light was that while Canada is making good progress in advancing the SDGs, relying on alignment alone won't entirely get us to where we need to be. And while governments and organizations across the country are contributing to the SDGs, we're faced with an extremely ambitious and multidimensional agenda across the social, environmental, and economic dimensions that no single actor or any level of government can do on its own. So if we're going to accelerate the progress on the goals, we need a common vision, we need leadership, we need intent, and we need coordinated action. But we also need to foster more partnerships, more innovation, and more awareness and engagement. So Federal Budget 2018 last spring provided more support for coordinating, monitoring, reporting, and data for the advancement of the 2030 Agenda, as well as funding for programming related to the SDGs. The Prime Minister also mandated the Honorable Jean-Yves Duclos, Minister of Children, Families, and Social Development, to lead the coordination of the 2030 Agenda in collaboration with other ministers and departments who remain responsible for advancing and reporting on the SDGs under their purview. The SDG unit was established to support the minister, but also to serve as a focal point for Canada. And our role is really to be the glue that brings all of our work together. Our main deliverable in the short term is to develop a national strategy through engagement with other federal departments, provinces and territories, municipalities, Indigenous peoples, civil society, businesses, youth, academics, among others. And we've already begun engaging with some stakeholders on the process for the development of the national strategy. And our engagement will be based on the principle that the SDGs are not the sole responsibility of a single actor, but a shared responsibility. And our end goal is to develop a whole-of-society approach to Canada's implementation of the 2030 Agenda. We're also responsible for administering an SDG funding program, which will aim to support innovative and horizontal initiatives that advance progress on the SDGs. And we're looking at supporting projects that promote engagement, build awareness, foster partnerships and networks, and build knowledge on the SDGs, and that ultimately leave no one behind. So we're creating a national strategy, we're establishing a funding program, but to make progress on the goals, we also have to measure progress. And for that, we need reliable, timely, and disaggregated data. And so Statistics Canada continues to work with the UN and other partners on the Global Indicator Framework. Last May, they launched an SDG data hub that provides statistics and metrics to track Canada's progress across all 17 SDGs. The unit is working closely in collaboration with StatsCan, who's also leading the development of Canadian indicator framework so that we can track and report on progress using indicators that are adapted to the Canadian context and reality. And our engagement on the national strategy will help inform the selection of national indicators that complement the global indicators. So, as you can see, we've got a big job ahead of us, but I know that we're not alone. Just looking around the room, I see and hearing from the projects, we've got dedicated people. And we all have a role to play because the 2030 agenda is everyone's agenda. And it's our hope that the national strategy that we develop will also be your strategy. And the unit is really here to serve us all in achieving our common objectives. And so over the course of the conference, I'd really like to hear from you about the work that you're undertaking, how we can shape our strategy, how we can raise awareness, how we can foster continuous engagement and partnerships and effectively accelerate action on the goals. So once again, thanks for inviting me, and I look forward to a productive discussion.
All right, thank you very much. Fraser, we're going to go to you. A reminder, Stephanie is going to be open for questions a little later on with the time we have in the panel. But of course, in the course of the health break later on too, she's not going anywhere. And she's going to be with us for 2 days, which is terrific. Fraser, from the CCIC's perspective, what's been going on?
Thank you. That was really exciting to hear from Stephanie how much progress has been made in just the past few months. I thought it would be useful to maybe help contextualize things. So I was at the meeting last year, and a lot of progress has been made since last year. So I thought I might provide a little bit of an overview of what's happened. We've already touched upon it with Stephanie, and then also provide some thoughts or reflections on what we need to do moving forward. So I'd characterize the past year as providing greater clarity and humility as well. Greater clarity on what Canada's going to do, but with our typical Canadian approach, being humble about what we still have to achieve and the progress that we have to make. Linda's already talked about the Auditor General's report. That was a big deal, I think, for Canada. It was a big deal for the world. As Linda's mentioned, there's 80 audits taking place around the world looking at different countries' preparedness to implement the SDGs. And what the Auditor General or the Commissioner on Environment and Sustainable Development found, as Linda has mentioned, is that a year ago there was no governance structure in place, no way to, beyond working groups, to connect between different government departments. There was no engagement or consultation strategy, no implementation plan, no monitoring and evaluation framework. Statistics Canada had moved the mark forward. They'd collected around 68% or had identified 68% of the data that needed to be collected against the global indicators in the Canadian context. So still we were very, very late in coming to this. Thankfully, since then, things have shifted a lot. We now have, in Budget 2018, as Stephanie mentioned, there's now dedicated resources, 50 million roughly, going towards Statistics Canada over the next 13 years to measure progress, and around 60 million for implementation, connecting between the different government departments, between different stakeholders who will be responsible for implementing this agenda. They've established an SDG unit, which Stephanie is part of, that will also help facilitate the coordination between different government departments. I think this is, as critical as I may be of how slowly this process has moved, I think it's also, we have to put ourselves in the shoes of government officials. In this light, we've got now 8 government departments who are working together. We talk a lot about silos. You know, the SDGs is a good way to further silo groups. We're trying to break down those silos and coordinate between different government departments. So I think it's great. The approach that the unit is taking as well is to bring in experts from those different government departments, because we know that we need to have that integration of ideas and approaches. Canada also presented its first voluntary national review to the High-Level Political Forum. So the High-Level Political Forum is the annual meeting that takes place at the UN to review progress on SDG implementation. Countries use the voluntary national reviews to report on what they're doing around country implementation. We've had over 100 countries presented VNRs. This was the first one for Canada. Again, a little bit of a baseline on where we're at, and still a lot to do. Wanted to also flag that on the civil society side, we've really come together. We have meetings like this at Together 2017, 2018, but also CCIC was one of the founding members, along with the International Institute for Sustainable Development, Community Foundations of Canada, the British Columbia Council for International Cooperation, among others, to establish Alliance 2030. So this is right now, it's just a website, but it's a way for different actors across the country, private sector, academics, civil society, to connect. It's a searchable database that's telling stories around what different groups are doing in their communities, in their cities across the country to move this forward. We want it to be something bigger and better, eventually a way for communities to connect with funders, for ways to feed in research and data around what's taking place across the country. So we have physical meetings like this, but our hope is that a digital space will also help facilitate collaboration between different organizations. So that's alliance2030.ca. In terms of where we need to go, it is an ambitious agenda. There's a lot ahead of us. It can be daunting, but this is not just a government agenda. It's not about a whole of government approach. It is, but it's more than that. It's about a whole of society approach. It's about all of you. It's about academia, about the private sector, civil society. We all have a role to play, an interest in playing a role in moving this agenda forward. So how do we do that? How do we move beyond ad hoc consultations to more meaningful engagement and participation and partnership with all of these different groups? How do we find those spaces in between the goals to make sure that we're not just still working in our silos, but we see the connections between the different goals. We see opportunities and new chances for collaboration with different actors who we maybe typically haven't collaborated with. How do we raise awareness among Canadians? How do we get everyone talking about these different goals, caring about this agenda? And how do we report on the progress to Canadians? It's interesting to note that we did a study with a range of international networks, and of the around 45 governments who reported to the UN last year through the voluntary national review process, only between 10 and 15 were actually reporting at the national level to their parliaments on what they're doing. We don't yet have a process for reporting to parliamentarians, for reporting to Canadians on what we're doing on this agenda. How can we do that? As I mentioned, it's not just about alignment to the goal, it's about connecting the dots between the different policies, between the different goals, between the different actors. How can we find those spaces in between? It's about doing things very differently from how we've been doing them before. How do we leave no one behind? Typically, there's a lot of people in the room. We come from places of privilege. We're not those who are being left behind. How can we make sure that we include those organizations who don't get consulted on, who are smaller, who don't have the budget to dedicate to this, but who are doing really important work on the ground? How do we make sure that they're included in this process? It's also, I think, when you think about, to some extent within Canada, but outside of Canada, it's not necessarily in the government's interest, in many governments' interest, to think about those who are being left behind. In many cases, organizations, individuals, groups of people are quite intentionally being left behind. So how do we address that? Two more points. How do we, as somebody mentioned earlier, we have to pick some priorities. We have to demonstrate where we're going to be able to show some leadership, where Canada has an advantage on certain things. But we have to be a leader on none, and a leader on some, and a laggard on none. So how are we going to leverage those advantages? Canada has a huge coastline. Is that an opportunity for us to really move the agenda forward? We have huge forests. How can we move that forward? How can we make sure that the way that we're interacting and engaging with Indigenous peoples is a model for the world? And then finally, just coming back to this point, it's about all of us together. It's about building these alliances. It's about continuing these conversations. So hopefully, just as our colleagues before have talked about different websites, I'd encourage all of you to check out alliance2030.ca. It's an opportunity for you to connect with different organizations and to tell the stories about all of the work that you're doing as well. Thank you.
Fraser, thank you. Thank you very much. All right, we'll go to Mel Wilson. Mel, if you can pull your mic closer to you so we can really hear you loud and clear. From your perspective, from where you sit, what's been going on? Were you going to be using some slides to illustrate that?
I have a couple of slides if I could.
Sounds good. We'll find them.
There we go. And I'm going to have to take the podium so I can use the clicker. Sorry, folks.
Mic over there too, Mel.
Can we leave the mic here?
Yeah.
No, okay.
We can bring the clicker to you.
Well, look at that. I have to see what I'm doing now.
All right.
Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Mel Wilson. I brought some slides because a picture speaks 1,000 words, and I'm sure you don't want to listen to me speak 1,000 words. So I will use the backdrop here. My focus over the last couple of years has really been bringing the SDGs into the Alberta consciousness. And starting in 2015, I had an interesting meeting. See if I can get this to work. Can somebody?
Do you want the next slide?
Yeah.
Yes, you want to advance the slide?
Any idea?
There we go.
Oh,
there you are.
Okay. So I'm not going to go through all the details here, but what I wanted to just bring out is that in 2015, I happened to have a meeting with some folks from the Alberta government. It was the newly elected government at that time, summer of 2015. And they were heading over to Europe on a series of meetings with different government representatives in different capital cities. And their mission, they were told to go over by the government. It was for the Department of Intergovernmental Affairs at that time, now Economic Development and Trade. They were going over to Europe basically to convince the pension plans and other public investment houses not to divest of fossil fuel companies. And the reason why they were sending this delegation over to Europe was because of the concern that there would be a sudden and precipitous divestment initiative, which has already started, by the way, called Leave It in the Ground. But the implications of that initiative for the province of Alberta were and are relatively severe. And there was sufficient concern within the Alberta government to send the delegation over. I met with them in Calgary as they were heading to the airport. And we had a long conversation, and they asked the question, well, what can Alberta do to address a lot of the international concerns about the fossil fuel industry and climate change and so forth? And so I took it upon myself to do a bit of research and digging and quickly realized that what the government of Alberta was doing at the time with regards to climate change, the establishment of the Climate Leadership Panel, which was going to develop a climate leadership plan, all that was good stuff. I didn't really have a lot to add to that. But what I uncovered during my research was that the United Nations was in the process of finalizing this thing called Agenda 2030. And as part of that, there were the 17 SDGs. These were still in draft for public review and comment, but were sufficiently baked that we could have a conversation about them. I came up to Europe, up to Edmonton, summer of 2015.
Same thing.
Europe, Edmonton. I came up to Edmonton here. I had a roundtable meeting with roughly 12 to 15 folks from the government of Alberta. And I threw out an idea. And the idea was, hey, what if Alberta officially supported the SDGs? And there was several reasons for doing this. One is a lot of the concerns regarding the fossil fuel industry, there's local concern, certainly, but there's also a lot of concern internationally. And the SDGs represent an international language to talk about these issues. So let's use a language that has been crafted for international dialogue. Secondly, the SDGs are not just climate change. And there has been, I've been working in the environmental/sustainability field since I finished my graduate degree back in 1992. And over that period, there has been a continuous concentration of sustainability, the conversation around sustainability, down to where it was almost the only issue that seemed to matter was climate change. Now, when you look at the SDGs, you quickly realize that climate change, it's an important one, but it's one of 17. It's not the only thing. And so by taking the approach of looking at the broader picture, a more holistic view of sustainability rather than just climate change, it gives Alberta a chance to take a look at not just the negative impacts of industry in the province, but also what positives it contributes to. The education system, the healthcare system, job creation, all the work that's been done on reclamation of habitat and so forth. There's a lot of positive things out there that don't get raised if the conversation is strictly on climate change. And that's not a holistic view of sustainability. One issue does not make up sustainability. So I pitched this idea to the government of Alberta 3 years ago, and the response was, this is an interesting idea, we like it. However, before we give a green light to anything, we would like to get feedback from the other stakeholder groups within the province, in particular industry, but also the not-for-profit sector and academia. So since the summer of 2015, I've organized and led a number of roundtable meetings, both in Calgary and Edmonton, with folks from industry, academia, the not-for-profit sector, and government. And we've had roundtable conversations around the SDGs and what they mean to Alberta and what they can mean to Alberta. One of the outcomes of that process of roundtables was the Together 2017 event, which Heather and the group at ACGC led, did a fantastic job. But that largely came out of a series of conversations that took place within the two major cities in the province. Fast forward to today, we're here today. There has been a number of organizations, major energy companies, for example, major companies in the agricultural sector, who have officially recognized the SDGs in their sustainability programs on their websites and so forth. So we're starting to see uptake by a lot of organizations. And where I hope to see things going, 2019 and beyond, is to have Alberta officially throw its support behind the SDGs, and the same way that it did with the United Nations Declaration of Rights for Indigenous People. And I'd like to see all sectors support that initiative. Now, there's a lot of people that would hear that and say, well, yeah, that's never going to happen. That's, you know, if it was going to happen, it probably would have happened by now. Well, I can say with confidence that the government of Alberta has already started down the road, even if they don't realize they have.
Next slide. All right.
So I took some time a few months ago, and I did a quick mapping exercise. I took the Government of Alberta's strategic plan for 2018 to 2021, which has a lot of tables in the back section with some targets, and I simply mapped the SDGs to those targets. If I could just get you to go through these slides quickly, please. And as you can see, virtually every strategic goal in the government's plan has a corresponding SDG. And almost every SDG is represented in the strategic plan. So whether the government of Alberta recognizes it officially or not, they are setting goals that are somewhat, and in some cases very aligned with the SDGs. So the work has started. What needs to happen, I think, next is that official recognition that the SDGs are aligned, or at least are being used to inform the province's sustainability and strategic plan. And if we can get other provinces to do the same, that will advance the SDGs across Canada. And Canada, as the Canadian government as a whole, can step onto the world stage and say, yes, the federal government's doing a lot, but look at this. Our provinces are taking bull by the horns themselves. And the last thing I'll say, this part is another outcome of the roundtables that we held over the last few years is, if we can go to the last slide, please. We've started up an organization called the Alberta SDG Network. This is a quasi-virtual network, meaning we exist primarily by email and electronic communications, but we do meet in person from time to time. Future roundtable meetings that, at least that I'll be involved in, will probably be hosted by the network. I'd encourage everybody, especially if you live in Alberta, but it's not restricted to just Albertans, everybody who would like to be part of a communal conversation as to what the various sectors, what the different organizations can do to support the SDGs. This is a good way to do it. And there are, in addition to the communications back and forth, there is an opportunity to catalyze some collaboration between like-minded organizations. So I'll leave you that. I'll stop there. And, but I would encourage you, if you're interested, you'll see my email at the bottom of the slide. Just fire me an email, and it's as quick as that. It's free to join. And right now, we're starting to approach 200 professionals from across the province as part of this network.
Mel Wilson, thank you very much. Really appreciate it. Thank you. John Beal, you have been working hard. What's been going on?
Yeah. Maybe before I start into what SDSN is all about, I'll just talk about briefly how there's really good momentum building in Canada around the SDGs. You see it here in the room, you see it from kind of what we've all been talking about so far. Alliance 2030 brings civil society together. The Global Compact Network talking about the SDGs with businesses in Canada. A lot of different groups interested in participating and contributing towards the SDGs in Canada. And government really taking a lead role now as well. So there's a lot of momentum building and a lot of excitement in Canada to contribute towards this agenda. Part of the challenge remains in the awareness, as Fraser was talking about. A survey in 2017 from the UN Association of Canada, looking at what's Canadians' awareness around the SDGs. 11% basically of Canadians are aware of the SDGs. Now that jumps in terms of support once they learn a little bit about it. 80% of those same people are really interested and think it's a good agenda. So part of the job that we're all working on is really about that awareness raising and then making sure that we can ground these big global goals into communities and see community action around, in tangible ways around creating a better Canada and a better world. So I'll talk about the Sustainable Development Solutions Network, SDSN. It was started in 2012 by the well-known economist Jeffrey Sachs. And what he was looking to do was bring together knowledge institutions from around the world, as Dan was saying, like universities, colleges, research groups, and think tanks, to mobilize and come together around the Sustainable Development Goals, and to use that expertise that's found within these institutions towards influencing policy, raising awareness more generally, and kind of trying to change the systems around how financing flows towards the SDGs. So since 2012, the network has grown, 850 members worldwide and growing, 26 national and regional chapters, of which Canada is the latest chapter in this global initiative. So we launched this past May, hosted at the University of Waterloo in partnership with the Waterloo Global Science Initiative, who has a launch of their blueprint called Generation SDG later today, which will be a really great document to look at what are some of the fundamentals of implementing the SDGs in Canada for those communities and community voices that are really interested in taking on this agenda. So I'll encourage everyone to be there, and I think that'll be really fantastic. So I just wanted to say a quick note about why knowledge institutions, besides the fact that Jeffrey Sachs is a professor, and so that's maybe a natural place to go. But knowledge institutions, in particular universities, have really important roles to play here. The transformations that we're looking for with the SDGs are big, and universities traditionally are at the center of that, of innovation and economic development and promoting new ways of thinking around big challenges. So knowledge institutions, there's kind of 5 main areas here. The ability to educate around sustainable development. There's a ready and willing audience that wants to take in this information and be trained in ways of thinking about sustainable development. Supporting policy processes, contributing research and development, incubating businesses on university campuses and clustering them together. And then the convening role that universities play in particular, as we're witnessing here today as well. In terms of SDSN's global initiatives, quite a number of them. So I won't go through them, but just kind of on a higher level, they're looking at how do we fill the financing gaps for the SDGs. In particular, how do we mobilize the world's billionaires to give philanthropically towards sustainable development around the world? How do we benchmark SDG performance by country? So there's the SDG index that the SDSN globally released this year, ranking 150 countries around the world on their performance. Canada was 20th in the world, and you can see kind of where we're failing and where we're doing well. Looking at sustainable pathways for a number of SDG-related areas, such as decarbonizing economies or sustainable land use and agriculture. Bringing together these big international coalitions to do statistical modeling and pathway modeling, and to use that information as a foundation to go to government and say, you need to be taking this into account as you make policy and as we think about what up to 2030 could be looking like and beyond. And mobilizing youth. I think it's been great to hear about all the great youth initiatives in Canada happening. And I think, with EWB and Net Impact, some great opportunities for partnership potentially as well in mobilizing the youth of Canada around the SDGs. So for SDSN Canada, we're looking at how do we mobilize Canadian scientific and technological expertise towards sustainable development. Our focus is on Canada and progressing the SDGs in Canada, but bringing that expertise internationally as well, and we see Canada as an international leader in this space, or that we could play a much bigger leadership role. We're looking at where are the breakthroughs needed. In Canada, there's a great report by the Brookings Institute around tracking Canada's performance along all 17 SDGs and looking at where we're falling behind on SDG performance and where do we need breakthroughs. What are the big research questions and gaps in knowledge that we have around the SDGs in Canada, and how can we help fill that? These are some of the things that SDSN is thinking about. And the SDGs offer such a great framework to bring people together. So we're looking at how do we bring academia together in a more unified voice to create a research agenda for Canada on the SDGs. How do we localize these big ambitious goals within Canada at the municipal level and at the provincial level, even within the various kind of neighborhoods and communities. We want to promote high quality education around sustainable development and really foster debate and link Canadian expertise to bigger global initiatives. So we have, I'll just quickly go through a few things. We have 4 kind of initial focus areas. We're looking at sustainable and inclusive cities, Canada's energy climate nexus, doing justice to life on land and below water, and education and training for sustainability. These are the kind of SDSN Canada's 4 initial focus areas, likely to expand as our membership grows and we get more input on kind of where the breakthroughs are needed and where the gaps exist. And what we're trying to do within this first year is try and match a project or a research initiative around each of these 4 areas. So I'm happy to say that we're actually just about to get started on a Canadian SDG Cities Index, where we'll be benchmarking, I'm not sure exactly what it might be, but 100 municipalities throughout Canada on their performance on the SDGs. And then working with them with the intent of working with them to try and embed the SDGs into the language of municipal government and decision making, and look at where the gaps are in the data and see how academia can help fill those gaps. There's a lot of good work, I was talking about momentum, a lot of good work from the BC Council for International Cooperation and from the International Institute of Sustainable Development in this space as well. And so we look forward to working with them on bringing a really robust index followed by other tools for Canadian municipalities to really take leadership roles in the SDGs.
All right.
We're looking at developing some teaching case studies for sustainable development, kind of like the business school approach, but more oriented towards the SDGs and sustainable development, really to ground decision-making into the curriculum of students looking to learn about the SDGs and sustainable development more generally. We want to be part of national gatherings such as the Together series and other kind of solutions forums that we're thinking of, looking at specific solutions that are taking place around the country and how can we give them a spotlight and how can we help scale them up through that exposure. And then we have a project going on right now looking at modern and historical treaties between Canada and First Nations within the country. And how, looking at kind of how the language within these treaties aligns with the language of the SDGs, and how is it already kind of baked in and embedded into those treaties, and then what research questions emerge from that that would support the realization of key treaty rights as well. So that's kind of a research project that's started and will be done kind of in 2019, and with ambitions to grow that further as well.
All right. John Beal, one more point.
One more point, yeah. So SDSN Youth, looking at national youth consultation, looking at SDG boot camps and how do we train the next cohort of SDG leaders in Canada. Climate pop-up labs, K-12 sustainable development educational curriculum, lots of good work from ACGC and others as well in this space. And so maybe just kind of last point, we started with 5 members, we've grown to 19 just in 6 months. We're seeing a lot of good and excited interest to work together on the SDGs from academia in particular, and look forward to working together with all of you.
Terrific, thank you. John Beal, thank you very much. Heather, you've been working with a small but mighty team over the past little while. You put on in Calgary Together 2017, marshaled all the forces, leveraged all the stuff, and got everybody here for 2018. What are the types of things that you've seen that have made you hopeful over the past 12 months?
Yeah. So first of all, I'm going to say I'm going to be really, really short because I know it's exciting when we actually have all these people up here reporting back, but we're not very good at 5 minutes each, are we? We're not. It's not our strength. There's just too much stuff happening for us to be good at the 5 minutes each. So to begin, I do want to just visit back a little bit about what Mel was saying.
How we got to the Together 2017 really did come from this groundswelling, from Mel's initiative of getting people together, talking about why the SDGs were important. And I can't reiterate enough how important it is for me that the Together Symposium is the multitude of voices, the multitude of perspectives, that we have people coming together from academics, from business and private sector, from civil society, and from government to talk about the SDGs. That's the only way we're going to get to where we need to get on Agenda 2030. So that's the sort of the base rock, I guess, of the Together Symposium. When we all left Calgary in October last year, the rest of the ACGC staff all slept for some time. Spent a lot of, there was wine. But basically, we all went our separate ways, and we had to come up with we had to come back and have some sort of a report to share with you, to tell you what we had decided and what had come out of Together 2017, that could also come back when we started Together 2018. So we commissioned a report. You can go online. It's a lovely report. It's very pretty. Most of you, if you were there last year, your photos will be in there. You can go find yourself, I suppose, in the report if that's your thing. But we did come up with some key findings that came out of that report. And I'm just going to go through a couple that I think are particularly important. And I want to note that this particular report came out after the symposium, but before a lot of the exciting work that you've heard about already happened. So I probably should have gone first. Lessons learned, lessons learned. But one of the things that, so I'll go through just a few and point some of that work out for you. One of the things was that we needed to accelerate the efforts to implement the 2030 agenda. It was a key thing that came out of 2017, is we were not going fast enough, we were not going far enough, and we did not have all the people that we needed moving on this doing that fast. So that was a key role. We heard that from the Auditor General. We heard that from the Auditor General when she was at Calgary last year, and again in the spring when she spoke with her report. However, there's been a lot of change within the federal government on that. We have the SDG unit. We're so delighted to have this unit in place, and we are so delighted because of their openness to engage with all of the different components of groups working in the SDGs. So a lot's been going on there, and a lot still needs to happen. That we need to raise awareness. So like John was saying, Canadians don't know about the SDGs, and we need them to understand what the SDGs are. We need them to understand that the SDGs are not a United Nation thing that happens there, that it is in fact something that is happening here, that it is universal, that it includes leaving no one behind, that it is as important what we do in Canada as it is what we do in other countries around the world. So raising awareness is really, really key. It's obviously one of the reasons we do a symposium and we bring people together to talk about the Sustainable Development Goals. I do want to just do one little flag too, that this Together Symposium was acknowledged by the United Nations. We were a finalist in the SDG Action Awards in Bonn, Germany, solely because we brought together people from diverse backgrounds and diverse perspectives to talk about the SDGs. A couple other really quick ones. We need to play a strong role in financing the Agenda 2030. So that was something that I think when we look at it in Canada, but also around the world, how we finance. Linda brought up earlier our sort of not so great amount of ODA that we've got to work with. That we need to look at what that looks like. We need to be able to increase that. We need to accelerate implementation. We need to localize the 2030 agenda. So we need municipalities in this country to be on board. We need provincial governments to be on board. That's going to be a huge focus for ACGC over the next year, is how we are going to bring on the Alberta government. And Mel's obviously going to be one of our key people that we'll work with on that. And then just the final thing that I'll say is that Canadians from across the country are interested in engaging on the SDGs. There is a lot happening on this, as you've heard already. We have CSOs that are highly engaged in the SDGs. We have people from across the country that are joining us via live stream, that are engaged, that have been developing tools, that are gathering people, that are convening people, that are talking about the SDGs. You know, we have all sorts of resources that are getting developed, as John mentioned, for schools, for universities. So we have those CSO people that are working on this. We have Indigenous groups that are very interested in working on this. This aligns so well with our obligations under UNDRIP that we have to meet. The business sector, we know this framework resonates with the private sector, and we need to encourage that they continue to use this framework. And then finally, the post-secondary institutions, where we're currently located, where people are located around the country right now listening. These groups are working on the SDGs. We need to continue to work together. We need to amplify and speed up what we're doing. But I think that going from Together 2017, coming to Together 2018, I know we're going to go to Together 19. It's not going to be in Alberta. We're building that momentum, and I think this conversation is really, really important for that.
Heather, thank you very much. Okay, we're going to open the floor to questions. For those of you in Edmonton, there's a microphone on my right, on your extreme left, if you want to go to it, or if you want to engage with Slido, sli.do, if you want to direct questions to the panel. And I, of course, invite our colleagues in Halifax, Charlottetown, and Toronto to do the same. Do we have any questions so far? Webmaster? No. Nothing so far. I've got a question for you. Mel, you started it off earlier by saying, well, if I had a wish for 2019 to report to this gathering in 2019, wherever it might be, it would be that the Alberta government has officially endorsed their support for the SDGs, and you got the ball rolling. Other members of the panel, what would you like to be reporting on in 2019 in terms of progress that you'd really like to see happen over the next 12 months? Who'd like to start? Go ahead, John.
Nope, you go. I get to talk all the time here.
I think kind of a similar line, but seeing municipalities take action on the SDGs.
Okay.
Have a really good understanding and really aligning SDGs into their work.
Okay.
Can I follow up on that really quick? Like, those of you from the city of Edmonton that are in here, wouldn't it be cool if Edmonton had a local national or local review, a voluntary local review?
All right. And on how we're doing. I mean, in the US, the nice model example is the city of New York. Mayor de Blasio has really embraced the SDGs and is an international model for how cities should actually be moving forward. Other comments for what we'd like to report on in 2019? Fraser.
I'd say from the perspective of Alliance 2030 that it's, a network of 500 plus organizations actively collaborating together on different programs and really moving the agenda forward, making concrete steps, making real changes.
Okay, I'm going to go to slide. Oh, did you want to comment, Stephanie, on that?
Well, you can go to the next one.
All right, sounds good. The question from wherever is how can individuals, organizations, community groups let the federal government and the world know what we're doing to advance the SDGs? How can they go about this? Panel, who'd like to start? How can individuals, organizations, community groups let the federal government and the world know what we're doing to advance the SDGs? How can they do that?
I'll take that question.
Stephanie, you've got the floor.
Yeah, I think right now we're just establishing the SDG unit, but I think really we're looking to be sort of the focal point. We're working closely or in collaboration with some of these partners on the panel. So I think by letting people know and letting that information filter up, and also coming to us directly, we're going to have an engagement exercise over the coming months, and information on how to feed in directly into that process will be shared with you. But in the meantime, you can always reach us on LinkedIn or by email. We can share that information for me, but we're just being established, so our digital presence is not quite yet set up, but definitely we're all ears when it comes to the work that you're doing. As I said, we're hoping that the strategy that we put together and the approach is a whole of society approach, so we really want to learn from you about the work that's being done, and we want to tap into existing networks that are already in place. So we're not trying to recreate the wheel. We really want to rely on what civil society organizations, academic institutions, what is already happening on the ground to inform the development of that strategy.
All right, and maybe Heather and her team could actually make sure that your contact information is available on the site to make sure that if anybody wants to reach you or find out what's really going on, they've got access. Did you want to comment, Heather?
Yeah, we'll share that information for sure with all of the delegates. But I think, Fraser, this seems to me like a perfect role as well for Alliance 2030.
Yeah, exactly. So, Alliance 2030, as I said, is just a website really right now, but it's an opportunity to connect. It's an opportunity for groups across the country to tell their stories about what they're doing. You can tag your story against the different goals. It's an opportunity to connect with different groups in different communities across the country around the same goals that you're working on, to collaborate, to think about joint projects that you could do. So first and foremost, it's a storytelling device. It's a way to get the word out. And we're also trying to raise awareness through a podcast series called No Little Plans. So you can also subscribe to that as well if you want to learn more. But it's an open platform, so anyone can join. You just need to sign up and you can start telling your stories.
All right, panel, most of you kind of said Canadians don't really know about the SDGs. And of course, when you're launching something relatively new, there's all sorts of myth busting that you've got to get into to make sure that people actually get the right narrative and understand the purpose and the why behind the what. In this case, what are the biggest misunderstandings from your perspective and your experience of the SDGs? Biggest misunderstandings? Who'd like to take it on? Heather, start.
It's not an infectious disease.
It's not an infectious disease.
That's
All right.
That was, I think, our first, the first one we had to
The power
tackle.
of tough acronyms. Thank you. What else have you seen in terms of misunderstandings? Go ahead, Mel.
One of the original misunderstandings when they first came out was that it was, yeah, these are nice, but they really only apply to the developing world. They're not that relevant to countries like Canada. And that took actually took a fair bit of dialogue to get people past that point to realize that this is very relevant to countries like Canada. And that one of the terms I've heard used is, if you look at Canada as a whole, yeah, we're a developed country, but it's very lumpy. Some areas of the country have very strong social support systems, others not so much. And other areas have very strong environmental protection laws and regulations, others not so much. And so it's not like it's a uniform across the entire federation that we have a consistent level of development. And one of the purposes of the SDGs, or one of the benefits of the SDGs, is to raise the bar for everybody, but in particular the parts of the country that are trailing behind.
Okay, any other comments, panel? All right, let me go ahead, Fraser.
I might also say that I think there's still a common assumption that when you talk about sustainable development, really you're just talking about the environment. One of the real efforts in the development of the Sustainable Development Goals at the UN was to bring two streams of work together that had been separated since the 90s and 2000s. So there was the UN Conference on Environment and Development that led to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, the Convention on Biological Diversity, the Convention on, but it's a strand on the environment, and then you have the Millennium Development Goals that are about development. So these brought those two processes together. It was very much, we need one framework on society, on economy, and on environment. One of the challenges here is that the Federal Sustainable Development Strategy is still about environment. It's not about that broader three pillars of sustainable development.
Okay, thank you. I'll go to a questioner on the floor in Edmonton. Sir, if you can introduce yourself, please.
Sure, Doug with Suston. This is for Stephanie and you, Fraser, picking up on John's comment. I spent a fair bit of time on SDSN with John and the Leadership Council and with the World Business Council. One of the bigger challenges that we observed as we watched the SDGs is scale. How do you scale impacts? Lots of projects. I like what John was saying about pathways. How are you developing pathways at the Canadian government and other groups to identify the systems that would actually scale the impact? For example, Canada is probably one of the world's best on natural solutions on climate change, one of the world's best on nutrient stewardship. Their systems are moving across the globe. Are you working at those pathways to pick them up and then engage others on them?
All right, thank you. John, do you want to tackle that one?
Was it, I thought he was actually asking Fraser.
Oh, Fraser, do you want to start? Go ahead.
Nice one, John. I think on scale, I mean, one of the things I've been thinking about is if the Canadian, or if the, I forget the exact indicator, but if the goal, or one of the indicators, for example, on oceans, is to protect 20% of the coastline. What if Canada doubled that, protected 40% of the coastline? Given the size of our coastline, that's going to have a huge impact. Similarly for, boreal forests or forests to the north, what if we put in place, conservation measures to protect that? Then you can have a knock-on effect as well to the rest of the world. So I think you can think about that in terms of scale. I also think, you think about the role of government. What are some signals just through policy or legislation that are going to put in place the right incentives so that suddenly civil society or private sector industry sees the reason why they need to get behind this and push forward. I think already some of the incentives are there. Somebody from Toronto Financial Services Alliance was talking at a conference we organized a while ago, and already the private sector is recognizing that 70% of their bottom line is going to be determined by factors related to sustainable development. So they need to tackle this head on. It's not waiting for them either. So already some of those internal incentives are in place, and I think if we can get the right signals from government, that will just move it further.
Yeah, one comment would be there's some large consortiums out there that are already picking up on the systems, like you say, like the World Business Council, and streaming them down. So rather than reinvent the wheel, you take a look at some of those bigger global systems that are already in play.
All right, thank you very much. Did you want to comment?
Well, just to pick up on Fraser's point is that just in terms of some of the work that the SDG unit is going to try and do with other government departments is really working on policy coherence and ensuring that in the mechanisms that are going to be put in place that the SDGs are considered, or at least the intersectoriality of the SDGs. So when you're thinking about the environment, you're also thinking about the social and the economic impact and vice versa. And it's sort of speaking to some of, the space in between that Fraser had mentioned. I really like that saying, is really trying to break down those silos. And we're going to try to do a better job at the federal level. But it's also thinking about what are the mechanisms that we need to do, across society to make sure that we're not working in those silos as well.
All right, thank you. We'll take one last question in the interest of time, because time is moving on. And that is, how do we better mobilize Canada's most marginalized communities to push governments to take further action on the SDGs, both provincially and nationally? So it's how do we mobilize Canada's most marginalized communities? Any thoughts on that panel? This is about leaving no one behind. In that spirit, so what do we do with marginalized communities? Your thoughts? Mel?
So there's, I don't think there's a silver bullet answer to that question. I think there's several things that can be done. And one is a movement. I'm not sure if that's the right term, but an initiative in some communities around what they call citizen science, and that's engaging community members who may or may not have degrees from university or college, but they can still be participants in significant data collection. So if you take as an example, in the concerns over changes in the climate, a lot of the changes in the climate will be first viewed and seen by people on the ground in different parts of the country, and with some relatively straightforward training and some skill building around record keeping and data collection. That information collected by citizens on the ground in small communities scattered all over, that information can be then rolled up through basically a governance process where information is collected and continue to concentrate until the provinces and then the federal government has a wealth of data to support various concerns and issues, whether it be environmental or social for that matter. But the original measurements are done by people on the ground, and as a result, they have ownership in the process and ownership in the results, and a feeling of involvement in terms of making a difference.
In the world of human development, we'll go to Fraser, grab the mic if you would. In the world of human development, there's a saying that goes something like, people tend to support what they help to build.
That's right.
And this is about engaging, informing, and involving individuals who have a stake in making the world a better place. So how can they be brought in? How can they be mobilized? How can they engage? Fraser, you had some thoughts.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think there's a danger here that we can instrumentalize groups, right, to move our agenda forward. We need you to mobilize around this agenda. If I think of what the government has done around the Feminist International Assistance Policy, it's recognized from evidence and research that the best way to move forward on gender equality and women's rights is by investing in grassroots organizations, the women working in those organizations who are responding to the needs of the local community. So if we want to move the agenda forward for those who are left behind, we need to systematically identify those groups. It's going to be hard because they're not the groups that we've typically been talking to. And we need to systematically invest in them for a long term, provide them the core support that they need. And they're going to move their programs forward. They may not mobilize around this agenda, but they may eventually, because they're responding to the needs of their community, and they'll be moving their agendas forward. And it really has to start at the community level, and I think probably we'll get more insight to on that tonight with the launch of the blueprint.
Absolutely. Thank you, Fraser. And to wrap up this panel, your final comments, Heather.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add a couple more comments on that. And one of the things I think that we talked about is the idea of mapping which groups are working on the SDGs. And so moving on that idea that people are working on the SDGs without knowing that they are in fact working on the SDGs is really important. I know that the Alberta government is supporting ACGC doing a project around the province, identifying those groups that are working on the SDGs, having conversations with all the different multi-stakeholder groups around the province. So building the knowledge base and the awareness for collaboration, I think, is going to be key. And prioritizing and setting the goals. So recognizing that we are not all at the same place. There are those that need, that are further behind that need to be brought up, I think is vital. And then I think also supporting a collaborative model so that we are collaborating, that we are sharing our expertise, we are sharing our knowledge here in Canada and abroad, I think is going to be one of the key things moving forward on this.
Ladies and gentlemen, our panel. Thank you very much. Thank you very, very much. We're going to be taking a break now, and we'll be coming back in about 25 minutes or so, but I did want to build on what Heather introduced a little earlier. She talked about, there's a group that met yesterday, about 30 folks who are brilliantly led on a process called How to Change the World. I'm going to ask you to please stand, the facilitation team and all the participants. Those of you who were here yesterday, please stand so people can see you. Give them a good a hand of applause because they worked hard yesterday. Now, I'm asking them to stand because in the course of the break today, and as well as lunch, please feel free to connect with them and ask them what they were discussing. And maybe the types of strategies that they learned yesterday in terms of the steps that are important to take in changing the world. We're going to be taking the break down the hall at Dinwiddie Lounge. And again, there's coffee, tea. Let me remind you that lunch today is at 1 p.m. So if you need to take some food in addition to the coffee and tea that are available, please do so. And let's be back here at 11:35. Have a great break. We'll see you soon.